Okay, in my last video I promised that the next video was going to be an analysis of the Indiana High School State Wrestling Tournament, but something came up and I really have to do this. As a little interlude here, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the NCAA National Wrestling Tournament because I discovered something really interesting there and I want you to see what's going on. So what the NCAA does in their wrestling tournament is that they use a 32 wrestler tournament. So here's the brackets for the 125-pound weight class. You have your 32 wrestlers that are here, and this is the championship bracket, and that leads all the way to the championship final. What we're interested in is what happens after the single elimination approach, and we can look at the consolation bracket. So this is the consolation bracket that you have for this, and you can see the way it's set up. It looks very much like a double elimination tournament, and in fact that's the way it mostly is. It's mostly a double elimination tournament until you get to the final. And this is something we pointed out for the Iowa High School State Tournament. If you had a true double elimination tournament, what you need to do is have the winner of the consolation bracket, which would be this position here, go back and face the loser of the championship bracket if they haven't already wrestled, in order to determine the true second place. In a high profile tournament like this, you don't have the opportunity to have that extra consolation match. So this type of an approach, while it ends up being a 32 wrestler double elimination tournament, it's not quite, because you're missing the extra consolation match at the end. The consequence of that is that you don't end up getting a true second place finisher. The second place wrestler is the loser of the championship bracket. The third place wrestler is the winner of the consolation bracket. But if they haven't wrestled each other, you don't know which one of those two is going to be better. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just noting that this is going to happen, and it's the nature of the beast. And so we're not going to complain about that. What we are going to take a look at is how is this double elimination tournament set up? Because this has been the focus of this series so far, setting up the correct way to do your tournament. So let's take a look at how the NCAA sets up their consolation bracket. Starting at the beginning, take a look at this matchup here. Spencer Lee, the number 1 seed against the 33 seed. We'll get back to that in a little bit. In the match, Lee wins, Owens loses. So where does Owens go in the consolation bracket? He goes right into this position at the top. And this is exactly what we would normally do in a 32-team double elimination tournament. The loser of that first match just goes directly back into this position. And I can tell you that all the rest of these wrestlers are doing that exact same type of thing. So this is exactly as we have talked about before. So there's Owens back into this position. Where the double elimination tournaments get interesting is what happens in the subsequent rounds. And remember, in our discussion of a 32-team tournament, we use this notation here where we label the matches in the championship brackets A through H, going top to bottom. In this tournament, Lee and Medley are wrestling in match A. I call it round 1. It's not technically round 1, but we're going to call it round 1. And so in this first round, Lee and Medley are going to wrestle. Lee wins, Medley loses. That's match A. Where does Medley end up at the end? So looking over here, and we look through this whole thing, whoa, Medley ends up way down at the bottom. So remember, on the championship side, he was on the top. On the consolation bracket, he's on the bottom. So what we're going to say is that the loser of match A comes down to here, and you can go through the brackets and do all the analysis, and what you'll see is that this is how it ends up being set up, that the loser of B goes here, C goes there, D goes there, E, F, G, H. We've seen this before. This is nothing new. If you've seen the old videos, it is a familiar situation, and it is a setup that we're going to label it from the top: H, G, F, E, D, C, B, A. So that's how the first round is set up. We're going to describe it in that way. So let's look at the second round. Okay, so let me think. Lee has beaten Medley and moved into this round here. Now these matches are the ones we labeled as I, J, K, and L. In this tournament, Lee wins match I, and Noto is the loser. Where does Noto end up in the next bracket? Whoa, Noto is up here. And so remember, Medley lost A, and he dropped all the way down to here. Noto lost match I and comes to here. And so this is the loser of I goes into that position. And if you look it up, you can see that the loser of J goes here, the loser of L goes there, and the loser of K comes down to here. So round 2 of the consolation bracket is set up as JILK. We can do the same thing for round 3. So now these are matches M and N. Match M is, of course, the famous Lee Ramos match in which Matt Ramos from Purdue, boiler up, beat Lee in the semifinals. What does that mean? If you come over to the consolation bracket side, remember, they started on the top. Now, Lee comes down to the bottom. That means the loser of that match M comes down to here. This is match M. The loser of N is up here. That final round is how we're going to describe that is NM. Put it all together. The NCAA tournament, it's a 32 wrestler double elimination tournament. The final setup for it is HGFEDCBAJILKNM using our notation. Now, if you go back to the 32 team tournament video that I did, you will see that we argued that that is the same as GHEFCDABJILKNM. We have examined this setup in the course of our analysis of 32 team brackets. There is a flaw in the plan, and that is that it doesn't actually have a true second place finish, so it's not a true double elimination tournament, but until that very end, it does have that double elimination tournament set up. I'm not complaining that it doesn't have a true second place finish. It's just something that's worth noting. So what does it mean? Okay, this slide here is from the original video on the 32 team tournament, and I used an assessment process and I looked at the top 10 performing tournament setups for a 32 team double elimination. Things you will see in here, for example, this one here, GHEFCDABKLIJMN. This is the one that we noted was used at the Iowa High School State Tournament in the last video. This is the approach that they used. We noted that it's perfectly reasonable to use this one. It actually has an advantage because it does do the best job of elevating the third best wrestler close to the third place position. But here's what I found absolutely fascinating. 32 team tournament that's used by the NCAA is in fact that one there. The GHEFCDABJILKNM tournament is the exact setup that we had recommended as the best approach overall for a 32 team double elimination tournament. That's exactly what the NCAA uses in their national tournament. I love that. It's such a good thing. It just shows you that there are inherent benefits of using this type of approach, and that the NCAA recognizes somebody made a deliberate decision to do that. I don't know if they did it because they knew that this was the very best approach, or because it looked like a good approach, and it really does. But whoever made that choice and however that choice got made, congratulations to the NCAA tournament. Love it. We absolutely love that. The NCAA uses the best overall approach for their national wrestling tournament. We couldn't have recommended anything better. Good for them. But that's not all. This even gets better. And let me tell you why. Some of the weight classes at the NCAA tournament have more than 32 wrestlers. They actually have 33. There's an extra wrestler in there. And let's take a look at how they handle that extra wrestler. What they're going to do, and this makes a lot of sense, is that they are going to have, well, we'll call it a pigtail because that's generally what it is, but there's a preliminary match. It's going to be between the wrestlers seated 32nd and 33rd. That's the way the bracket gets set up. So 32 and 33 are going to compete in this pigtail to determine who gets to move in to the bracket. And so this is the pigtail or the preliminary setup for, again, the 125 weight class at the NCAA tournament this year in 2023. What it was Owens from the Air Force is wrestling against Jordan from South Dakota State. So Owens and Jordan wrestle in this preliminary round. Owens wins the match 2-1. Owens moves on to the winner's position into the championship bracket. Jordan has to move back into the consolation. So where do we put this winner of the preliminary match? Well, if we go back to our championship bracket, you can see that Owens is in fact moved into this position here in the top of the top bracket against the number 1 seed. He moves into the position of the 32 seed. So that's where you put the winner of that preliminary match. But what about the loser? Where does Jordan go? Well, he has to go into the consolation match, and then he has to wrestle against the loser of something else. Which loser is he going to wrestle against? So Jordan is wrestling against Lorenzo. Where does Lorenzo come from? He's not coming from this bracket here. No, Lorenzo actually is way down here at this position. Just something worth noting. He's even completely in the opposite bracket of Owens for where the winner of the preliminary round went. The loser has to face the loser from the opposite bracket. That's really nicely set up, but we're not quite done yet at this point. So Jordan ends up wrestling against Lorenzo. Jordan wins, believe it or not. So he came out of the preliminaries, lost the preliminary match, then won the next match on. So Jordan comes in and he's going to move on in the consolation bracket, and sure enough, he shows up right in this position. Instead of Lorenzo, Jordan comes in down here. Now this is where it gets interesting, because if you look at what happened in the tournament, Jordan worked his way all the way back into here, so he won the next round in the consolation match. Owens, after beating Jordan, goes on and loses to Lee in that initial round, and so he ends up in the consolation bracket. But look what happens. Owens and Jordan, they are in opposite brackets in the tournament. And in fact, if they had won all the way through, they would not have met until the consolation finals. And you can imagine a situation, let's say, just for the sake of argument, that Lee, who beat Owens, is the best wrestler in the tournament, but Owens is second best wrestler in the tournament, and Jordan is the third best wrestler in the tournament. It would be a really ugly situation, no doubt, because the second and third best wrestlers wrestle in the prelim, and then the winner of that goes on and has to face the number 1 wrestler. Number 2 beats number 3 in the preliminary, and then number 1 beats number 2 in the opening round, and so they're both sent back into the consolation bracket. But even if that were to happen, I mean, and you talk about as ugly as a bracket setup as you can get. The only way you could get anything worse is if you put 1 and 2 into the preliminary round and have them face number 3. But even if that happens, what that means is that Owens and Jordan will advance all the way into the consolation final. Because this tournament does not have a true second place, Owens is not going to be able to work his way back into second place. But Lee would finish first, somebody else would finish second, and then Owens third, Jordan fourth. Despite the fact that those two wrestlers were faced up in a preliminary match and the winner had to face number 1, they could end up 1, 3, and 4 instead of 1, 2, and 3. You can't get much better than that. The only way you could get better than that is if you had a true second place, you could end up 1, 2, and 4 instead of 1, 3, and 4. The reason it works is because these two wrestlers are sent into the opposite brackets. In fact, if you look at how these two wrestlers are put into the bracket, after having faced each other in the preliminary, they actually can't face each other again, no matter what happens, until at least the consolation quarterfinals. It would have to be all the way over here. And the only way that would happen is that Jordan would be here if Owens had won the match against Lee and then lost in round 1. If Owens lost the match in round 1, he would end up down here instead of Medley. And then they would be on a collision course to meet at this position here. That's the earliest that they could meet up again in this tournament. I don't know if you can set it up any better than that. We have never done an analysis of a 64-team double elimination tournament, and I'm not going to do an analysis of a 64-team double elimination tournament. But off the top of my head, I think this is absolutely a reasonable approach for getting the optimal result. In the end, my statement to the NCAA is very well done. This is absolutely beautiful. Couldn't have set up a tournament better myself. So what do we conclude? In the end, it's simple. The NCAA National Wrestling Tournament is just brilliant. This is done so well, so elegantly. I love the way they have set these brackets up. The HGFEDCBAJLKNM is the approach that gives the best overall best results for a 32-team tournament. We know it because we actually did the analysis to confirm it. It's exactly what they're using. Great insight by the NCAA. Wonderfully done. Always going to have the flaw that you're not going to have a true second. When we talked about this in terms of the Iowa High School State Tournament, what we emphasized is that seeding becomes very important. As we said with the Iowa High School State Wrestling Tournament, we think that it's always going to be important to evaluate and improve seeding procedures so that they can get to be better. The last lesson to come out of this, and I make this as a plea, is that the IHSAA really needs to think about using this type of tournament approach as well. When I did the Iowa High School State Tournament, I thought maybe there was something that was traditional in the field of wrestling, or whoever was doing this, that maybe that this was something that it was inherent to, this is what wrestling programs do and this is the way we always do it. Sure enough, we do prefer to have the tournament approach that maximizes the outcome for the third best wrestler and all those types of things, but apparently not. No, there is nothing inherent that says you have to use the approach that the Iowa High School State Wrestling Tournament is using. The NCAA has shown that you can do it this other way, and from my perspective, they are doing it better. And so my plea to the IHSAA, reconsider your tournament. Think about changing those. Model yourself after the NCAA wrestling tournament. Who could argue with that?